Hello and welcome to a special podcast recording from Scottish Independence Podcasts. This is called Holyrood 2026. This is to bring you 3 of what we thought were very good speeches from the Scottish Independence Convention, which took place on the 5th of April in Govan. We weren't at that, were we?
No, we weren't. We had intended to, but in the end, we just got a bit too much to do and decided to give ourselves a Saturday off.
And we were quite happy because we knew it was being live streamed and we thought we'll find out what happened from the live stream. And then as it happened, the live streamers had issues with the hall, which is a beautiful hall, but didn't have sound system for them to use. So we are very grateful to Lewis Cedar from SPVR Films because he's given us the audio that he recorded on the day.
It is very good of Lewis, so otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Cheers, Lewis. So what we've got is they're 3 very good speeches. They were all given the remit to come up with 3 things that they would like to see in manifestos for Holyrood 2026. What we're going to do is play you the 3 speeches. We might chat a bit in between them. And then at the end, we can see if we've got any asks that we would like to see in manifestos. And I have some written down, and I can see you have some written down.
Lots of you who are listening can't see that we are currently holding up our pieces of paper with our suggestions. We'll get that at the end. It's an extra for the end.
Let's have Simon Barrow. Now, he didn't actually speak first on the day, but the reason we put him first is because he gave, I thought, a really good summary of what's a manifesto for? What's the point of what should it be like? And that sort of high-level introduction I thought was really useful.
So I'm Simon Barrow. I'm the secretary of the SNP's trade union group, but I also work in many cross-party ways as well, particularly through Democratic Left Scotland. What I'm going to do actually is just ask a fundamental question. What is a manifesto? And what would a good and effective manifesto look like? I asked someone what a manifesto was the other day, and they said it's a set of fanciful promises awaiting to be broken. And that's how a lot of people, feel about it. Very few people read them. There have been effective manifestos in history. In 1945, the Labour Manifesto, which presaged the introduction of the National Health Service, nationalisation of the mines and so on, was a pretty short document. It was 27 very small pages. And a manifesto, I think what it illustrated is that what a manifesto needs to be is it needs to be a vision statement. It needs to say what it is that you believe in and want to do. And the vision statement needs to have a plan attached to it, and the plan needs 1 or 2 good examples of how that can be put into practice. But I say this to myself because I'm sure in the process of drawing up manifestos, lots of us are going to be saying, can we get this in and this in and this in and this, and it grows and grows and grows. Corbyn's manifesto in 2019 had the kitchen sink in it, but it just didn't cut through. So thinking about that is really important. A manifesto must be personalised to be effective. What we actually need to have is the faces of the people who we're trying to reach, saying what it is their aspirations are, what challenges they face, what things have happened that they're grateful for but want to see more of. And then actually the policies need to be linked to those voices. Because a manifesto also needs to be a bridge, and a bridge in a number of senses. In 2026, we're going to elect people who have responsibility to run health, to run education, to run other things in Scotland. That's what a lot of people are going to be voting for. I think the whole debate about how you frame it in terms of independence, people will vote for lots of different reasons. I'm tempted to get into that debate, but I won't. But what I will say is that a manifesto that is going to be effective needs to be a bridge between remediation and transformation. There are some things that we need to adjust and change because we're not where we want to be starting from, and there are other things that really have to demonstrate the possibility of changing things much more fundamentally. And what that means, of course, is that there has to be a link between effective and participatory government, which is what people are electing people to do, and actually the reason for independence being essential in the first place. In other words, the manifesto has to have a core message, and the core message needs to be something like, power to Scotland means power to you. And again, making the link between people's everyday lives, between cost of living, between those issues and why independence is important. Because independence is a question, I mean, I think we find this a lot within trade union circles. If you try and have a conversation with people about independence, mostly it's like watching a game of chess where you know exactly every move that's going to be made and no one really changes their mind and the game works out in an entirely predictable way. But what I've found working with trade unionists is that if you ask some vision and plan questions as to what kind of Scotland we want to build together, you get some very clear answers. People want a Scotland with a reliable health service, with decent public services, with jobs which are rewarding, which pay well, which have good conditions, with an economy that works for the majority of people, not just for a tiny number. They want a green future for their kids and for themselves as well. They want educational opportunities at different places in life. They want housing. They want these things. And that cuts across an awful lot of parties. And so the next question is, where does power need to lie and with whom in order to make that a possibility? Now that's a question which is about independence, but it's framing it in a way that starts with what it is people are aspiring to and what they want. So effectively what I'm saying is I think we also need to make a bridge in the manifesto between the cause of independence and the cause of what I will, I think, call something like green social democracy. Neoliberalism has told us that social democracy is dying, and social democrats have agreed by selling their souls to corporatism. But that process needs to be reversed. I have to say I am myself a socialist, but things are heading in very much the opposite direction. And it was of course, Rosa Luxemburg who said that the ultimate choice is between socialism and barbarism. Right now, looking at the growth of the right in Europe, transatlantically, and the way the UK government is compromising on all of that, you could say it's going to be a choice between barbarism or social democracy, because Reform are licking their lips and waiting in the wings. And we have to have that as a central question in the manifesto. And then moving on to a conclusion, the other thing the manifesto needs to do is to have some joined-up policies. One of the difficulties we've had with Scottish governments in recent years is that we've had a lot of sort of bits of money spent on this and initiatives on that and so on, but there isn't an overall strategy for tackling poverty and inequality that links housing, that links education, that links into the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is industrial strategy. I don't know if anyone here knows what Scotland's green industrial strategy is, but a consultation took place last year and it was run by PricewaterhouseCoopers, the kind of people that you always want to run that kind of consultation. The Scottish Trade Union Congress actually had to put in a freedom of information request to find out where it was and to have some kind of input in it. And if you read this document, most of it is about preparing public services to sell off assets. That's the opposite of the direction that we need to move in. So I said, and this is my last point, we need to have some remedial stuff in this manifesto as well as the big vision and the big transformation stuff. And one of the things we're doing in the SNP Trade Union Group is we're bringing forward a motion which is precisely about that recognises that publicly controlled and community financed renewables are actually crucial to Scotland's self-governing future. That is the resource and asset we have in the future, and at the moment it's being sold off. So there are things that we can do about this current situation. One thing is, of course, for the party to have more influence on what the government is saying. But we need equity stakes in renewable energy projects and companies via the Scottish National Investment Bank. We need trade union recognition as the standard for delivering fair work. We need appropriate ownership term limits, active break clauses and just transition conditions in contracts and operational leases with overseas investors, and in relation to final planning applications. We need to focus public investment on domestic industries and developing local supply chains across transport, energy, construction, manufacturing, housing, with the priority of meeting climate targets through public sector-led retrofitting and offshore wind. We need to reconsider an asset-based national energy initiative. This is the National Energy Company, but it's under a new name. It needs to be done regionally. And incidentally, and I think I'll make this the last point, if we actually could build in Scotland and include in the manifesto a national investment bank that really invested in that way, in distinction to what it's doing at the moment, a national infrastructure company which we talked about and abandoned, and a national energy company constructed regionally. These are potentially small but transformative institutions which can begin to move from the everyday picture that people are facing to the kind of transformation we need. And we need a manifesto that really focuses on those kinds of transformational questions. Thanks.
It's actually a really kind of interesting talk.
What I really picked up out of what Simon said was, first of all, this phrase he came up with, power to Scotland means power to you. I like that.
Yeah.
It's true, power to Scotland, and it's not even party political, that one, is it? That's just why we should have power in our own hands. But he did talk about manifesto needs to be a bridge between remediation, transformation.
Remediation, what does that mean in that context?
I think what he meant was not only do they have to fix things that aren't working, they've got to go to new places. So it was that combination. Now, we've said ourselves that it's hard to get excited about doing the same thing more efficiently, but not doing the same thing more efficiently is not a good way to approach either. So I guess he's right on that. Where he then went was 3 very high level asks with not really much detail. He talked about a national investment bank, a national building company, and a national energy company as 3 institutions, which I think Commonweal have pretty much come up with those in the past. And they're really very good ideas, I think. And then that we should have a green social democracy and a green industrial strategy. So again, very high level.
They're high level. Is anyone going to say, no, we don't want that? Well, maybe that's a good thing to get someone, to vote for your manifesto. But I just, for myself, without disagreeing with any of those, I just kind of felt there isn't enough to kind of hold on to and, get a grip of and basically have a discussion of. It was just a bit too high level, maybe, for what was asked. Yeah, so it's very principial and actually really good stuff to think through. Yeah. But maybe not quite what you need for a manifesto.
So let's move on to the second speaker is our pal, Selma Rahman from Edinburgh Women for Indy. And hers were much easier to pick out, actually.
Yeah, this was the one I felt easier to get my head around what she was saying, just quite well structured. And also what struck me about it is they've obviously been out and about and they've acquired information. They've acquired an idea about what people want and what, would be good to put in a manifesto because they've been out on the streets talking to people.
So let's hear Selma and then we'll come back after that.
Hello again and good morning. My name is Selma Rahman. I'm a member of Edinburgh Women for Independence. I have fond memories of the SIC way back in the days immediately after the referendum of 2014. And I was also a member of the Women for Independence National Committee, and I look forward to their revival. Edinburgh Women for Independence is cross-party and no-party, commenced in 2013, was constituted in 2014 and still exists. Today is not about the grassroots movement per se, but we know that independence won't happen without an active, engaged grassroots movement. And there has to be synergy between the independence movement and pro-indie political parties. But sometimes, too frequently, politicians seem to forget that. Edinburgh Women for Independence, therefore, would like to acknowledge the value of the work of SIC, and especially in regards to today's agenda, Manifesto 26. We've already heard in the introduction that it is absolutely vital that we have a majority in the pro-independence parties at the elections next year. SIC set me a particular agenda. They asked us to identify 3 policy priorities that would work within the limitations of existing powers and policies which would create confidence in Scotland's ability to improve our quality of life. That was quite a challenge. But we need challenge because Scotland seems to be in some sort of hiatus. some sort of holding pen, waiting for the gate to open or miraculously to be opened for us. Our 3 priorities are based on the views of our own members, dialogue with others across the movement, but centred around the questionnaire work that we carried out post-COVID 22, 23 and 24. These are questionnaires that we do face-to-face with women, their companions, their families, their children. We meet them in the streets, we meet them at events, we meet them on parades. And this is what has informed our 3 policies. But we would like to reaffirm something else, that no one policy stands alone. To have an independent Scotland that will encompass the social, economic, democratic values that we seem to share and want to promote for ourselves and for the future, then the interconnection, the overlapping, the connectivity between priorities becomes obvious and even more important. Our first priority is address the challenge of climate change, but think about interlinking and connecting up. One example only, and you can tell that we cheat. 3 priorities drawing in lots of different aspects. Link up climate change, energy, nuclear power plus, private ownership versus state ownership. Experts have been saying long enough that switching to renewables will address the global economy, address climate change as we move from fossil fuel consumption. Renewable energy can be produced here. Wind, water, solar power to a degree in Scotland. But the cost of production is no longer related to what we pay here in Scotland. We're living with energies produced here but exported for the benefit of consumers out with Scotland. These are policies emanating from Westminster governments that we didn't vote for, who began the process of privatising the energy network as far back as the 1900s. We know that profits are funnelled into privatised companies for the benefit of shareholders. But what do we own? What do we control? How does the state support and benefit the consumer? Where is state ownership, control of energy production and distribution in Scotland? What do we own? What do we control? And I did mention the link to nuclear, and I'm talking about SMRs, small modular reactors. Advanced nuclear reactors providing energy should not be the way forward in Scotland, as has been whispered by Westminster. Security leaks, contamination, but the link is well established between SMRs and the manufacturing of nuclear weapons. SMRs provide and nurture multiple assets. Expertise of the workforce, the physicality of the reactors, and that which they contain. We seem to have forgotten that the UK's first nuclear power stations were built primarily to provide fissile material for nuclear weapons during the Cold War. And the last time we at Edinburgh Women for Independence looked, there still was a majority in favour of the removal of nuclear weapons from Scotland. The second priority that we have identified is to address the challenge of land management. Andy Whiteman says that the public sector estate has decreased by about 2.2% and more since 2012. The public estate. Where has it gone and to whom? And how is it being used and for what purpose? Around 15% of privately owned land has been owned by the same family for over 100 years. Who are these people? What do they do with that land? Tell that to young people who cannot get their foot or feet onto their housing ladder. Leslie Riddock, in turn, has informed us that 433 individuals control half of Scotland's private land. More than 500 communities in Scotland have taken ownership of land and buildings. But that disparity between population and ownership cannot be held up as any benefit for the local communities and all that these communities would expand into and incorporate for the greater well-being. Community buyouts are vital parts of Scotland these days, and they've secured a place in our idea of land. But they require to be supported from the time of the idea coming about and the actuality of the end product. Not the years of challenge, the financial barriers that take so much time and human effort to overturn. The state, Scotland, should be supporting, empowering, and initiating more and more ideas such as that. Yes, we need housing, social, rented, and private, but affordable, driven by need and not by profit. There are so many examples that I could give you, possibly in your own doorstep. I have two, of housing being thrown up, minus the infrastructures required for the new communities, but we end up with people living boxed up, isolated from their neighbours, without multiple resources. They drive in and drive out of configurations of buildings. We have examples of land uses, industrial, business, new residential, being built up with no payback to the surrounding existing communities. So link up and connect up. And of course, within the whole notion of land management, who is talking about food insecurity? Food insecurity with the rise of food banks, confirming in-work poverty, and the destructive hit from the latest economic downturn. No one is suggesting, least of all me, some sort of happy, clappy lifestyle digging up your small allotment. But the whole idea of food connection and food understanding has been removed from people. It is now centred around large supermarkets and what comes wrapped in cling film. Food production linked to locality and its people has not been explored nor maximised. Just imagine if food production became a norm when based on the local community involvement. Every time a piece of land is to be altered, purposed, or repurposed, the connectivity and appropriateness must be considered for its relevance to the overall impact of the immediate people and the immediate area. Scotland needs to nourish its land, not merely use it. For the third priority, I don't think you will be surprised when I say that we believe that there is a need for effective gender-proofing of policies. Gender-proofing policies and practices should happen within organisations, businesses, and government, because government should be leading by example. Why should you gender-proof, you may ask? On the one hand, gender-proofing improves efficiency, effectiveness internally to the organisations or government, and on the other, with gender-proofing, you will have created and implemented policies and practices that are informed and appropriate to need. Why is it required? Because we have systemic inequalities inherited over generations. Women make up nearly half the UK labour market, and their economic participation is key to the country's productivity but women's overall employment rate is lower than men's. Economic activity, we know, boosts individual and family welfare and well-being. So again, interlink and connect up. There are proven links between poverty and ill health, poverty and housing. Income generation surely should enhance quality of life. Is gender-proofing proven to be effective? Well, to date, no one country has achieved full gender parity, but guess what? The Nordic countries, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden and Denmark, along with New Zealand, have made notable progress in closing the gender gap. You don't have to look just at those countries, however. There are some other ones that might prove surprising. You can include Namibia, Lithuania, and it is true, Nicaragua. There are two policies fairly common across the suite, and those two policies are equal pay and paternity leave. But every one of those countries that I've mentioned have responded to their own identified needs whilst prioritising within overall gender equality. For example, in Norway requires a minimum percentage of women on company boards promoting gender diversity in leadership. Gender-proofing also enables fairness and inclusive societal progress. It would assist in ensuring individuals, irrespective of gender, have equal rights, opportunities, and representation in all aspects: education, employment, and overall well-being. We've done this questionnaire work over the years, and one thing that we have learned, you may call it a priority, people respond to the messaging of the priorities. When it becomes personal, people respond. When it affects your pocket, people understand. I was born and brought up in a tenement. Think about the cold, drafty houses. Talk about energy conservation. Talk about saving money. Talk about being warm. Make those connections. Make them relevant, and people understand, and people will come with you, or you will take people with you. In closing, I do hope that this chimes with your assertions within the SIC that we need policies which can help the pathways to independence. An independent Scotland should work and provide for all of us, for the many and not just a privileged few. It's up to all of us to make this happen, not just the politicians, no matter our individual priorities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Selma's three there, I wouldn't disagree with any of them. Address the challenge of climate change, but she was very keen on linking up. Climate change also links into energy and nuclear power and private ownership and all those clusters of things. Yeah. You have to link them up.
When I was listening to that, I was reminded of the talk that we put out this week by Laurie McFarlane, because he does the same thing. And it's maybe more in the context of land reform, but he just weaves things together, and it doesn't become complicated. It suddenly becomes, oh yes, of course. All these things are connected, and I think Selma did quite a lot of that. It's good.
She did, and in fact, her second ask was to address the land management challenge. And I had also written down on my bit of paper Laurie's talk because it was so good. If you haven't already listened to Laurie's talk, you'll find it on our website. And then the third thing, gender-proofing policies and practices. And of course, Women for Indy, good to see that women's focus coming in there. And she's absolutely right that if you don't start from a position of, does this work for everybody, then you end up with something that only works for half of the people. So that was a good one. And then the third speaker was Ian Black.
So my name's Ian Black. I work at Strathclyde University, although all these views are my own. A member of Yes Edinburgh North and Leith. I'm on the board of Commonweal. I work with the SIC and also the Scottish Independence Library, and I'm still a member of the SNP. So I wanted to sort of put all of these things out there before I started talking. But I'm here to talk about the environmental policies specifically. So I wanted just to sort of start with this sort of joyous point. Of course, we know we're in crisis, and we know that these crises aren't going to get any better unless we take systemic and deep-seated action. Things are going to get worse to the next century. America has tipped into a different state. And unless we're prepared to take deep-seated action, all we're going to be doing is not even shuffling around the deck chairs on the Titanic. And unfortunately, that's, I think, where we are in many of areas of what we're doing. And what that is doing is disheartening people from democracy and allowing people to shift, or allowing the right with its seductive messages to pull people across. So what I'm going to be suggesting are policies that are not trying to be the least worse. I mean, there was some terrible polling out last week which demonstrated that not one politician in the UK had positive ratings. Not one party had positive ratings. So you can win by being the least worst. So what I'm going to be doing are policies, well-known policies in many ways, that are thinking about being good, not necessarily the best. So my policies are aimed at success. They're aimed at acting at a structural level and at a crisis orientation. Because all of the crises that we face are crises today. Poverty is not something that we can think about in 5 years' time, because there are kids all over within 100 yards of this place who are hungry now, who are cold now. And that continues. The climate crisis, the daily instigation of more and more floods, and more weather events, are crises for today. What I'm also going to be suggesting is none of these things require magic bullets. My three policies absolutely do not require magic bullets. The thinking has been done, and in a couple of instances, we've got lots of experience of how this was done. So one of the things we've got to be very careful about is policies that require 5 more years or 10 more years. We've got the solutions today. We just need the mindset in which to implement them. So I'm going to be talking about how we create systemic change quickly, and to that I always go back to the brilliant Donella Meadows, doing a seminal work about leverage points on a system. And one of the things that she talks about, if you want to shift systems quickly, you have to change the goal of a system, because then all of the institutions, all of the infrastructure, all of the money then goes to solve that new goal. But how do you know how to shift a new goal? Well, you need how to set a new goal of a new system. You need a new mindset. So mindset is something that I brought around lots these days to describe things that need to shift. But a mindset is the knowledge, beliefs, skills and cognitive capacities you bring to solve a problem. So therefore, if we want to solve poverty, we have to bring in new knowledge, skills, beliefs, because we've been doing the same thing for the last 100 years. If we want to solve the climate crisis, we have to recognise it's our growth-based, extractive economy that's causing it. So my suggestions are very much at the mindset level and the belief level. So the three policies I'm going to be talking about to solve the environmental crisis are also designed to solve the poverty crisis, the fossil fuel cost of living crisis that we're in, the crisis that we're in about democracy, and very much designed to solve the problem of the economic system that is causing all of these things. So the first policy I want to suggest out is that we go back to a well-being economy approach. So I'm a member of the Wellbeing Economic Alliance, and what this does is provide a different version to what the purpose of an economy should be. It says the purpose of an economy is to create social justice on a healthy planet. That's the goal. It's not to grow more so we can get more tax. And by growing more, we create the problems that we then have to try and solve. There's various statistics around this, but about 90% of what we die of have commercial bases. Think about the cardiovascular issues that we have. We think about the pollutions, our economy that's creating these crises. So growing the economy more is not the solution we should be looking for. A well-being economy, social justice on a healthy planet. It sets out that instead of just measuring our success by one measure, GDP growth, we set a whole series, an index of measures. And GDP can be one of them, but it's also much more human sets of goals. So one of the things that we talk about in the wellbeing economy is complex practice indicators. And they can sound quite trivial, but they really set a government to act in much more human ways. If we set one of the goals that the First Minister had to report on every 6 months of how many girls are riding bikes, how many people are having a home-cooked meal with their friends, now start working back in your minds on all the things that have got to get right to be able to that to happen. So girls riding bikes. It's not middle-aged men in lycra zooming down past the road at 40 miles an hour. It's girls feeling safe in the roads. It's creating safe infrastructure. It's creating spaces that don't feel violent and fearful. It's building agency. It's creating spaces in roads and taking these things back. So all of the things that have to happen up the way. So the wellbeing economy sets these much more interesting and human goals for an economy. And then in every policy that it develops, it sets out these principles. The policies are at a local and a community level, are co-created by people, but they all have to have at their heart dignity. And what dignity means is that we've got enough food, we've got decent clothing, that we can live with dignity. It says that every policy that we should have should ensure access to nature. So we have spaces where we can enjoy in a restored and safe natural world. We've got connection, so a sense of belonging, and that the institutions serve us. That there's fairness, so there's justice at the heart of our economic system. And that finally there's participation, that we feel as though we are actively engaged in our communities. Now those are design principles, and every well-being economy policy has those in there in some way. So the wellbeing economy is not something where we all do yoga and sit down and think about our well-being. It's not an economy where we solve the stress of the economy we have now by nice things at the weekend. It's about dignity, connection, participation, and a social justice on a healthy planet. If that's the systems goal that I want us to work to, the second one I want to move on to is a policy called mission-oriented market making. And this is an approach that recognises that our policies to solve poverty, to solve the environmental crisis are not working, and that the causes are not the cure. So what mission-oriented national markets says is that we choose what our national missions are, and then the government recognises that it's the big dog in the room, and that its role is to create these markets, create the supply chains in order to solve these crises. So this is the idea of what happened during COVID, when the government decided that it had to solve certain problems, and that was our national mission. This is an approach developed by Mariana Mazzucato, also recently by Laurie McFarlane and Miriam Brett. So we've got lots of good thinking around here. And it's a strategic and interventionist approach to market creation and maintenance. And what becomes crucial in there is, well, what are the markets and what are the missions that we should be trying to solve? So I'd say that what we as Scotland should be doing is focusing on markets and missions that solve three crises: the climate emergency, the fossil fuel cost of living crisis, and the Scottish Government's relationship with business. In inverted commas, we don't think you're very good. Close. All that takes us to missions that link our forever needs, and our forever needs are things like heat, home, food, transport, meaningful work, sense of purpose, community and socialising. Those things are essential things for us to being human, and we will always require those. And we'll always require those in different cultural settings. So the missions I would suggest that Scotland sets itself are around everybody benefits from Scotland's energy. Not just the ex-oil and gas companies rebranded to extract our money off, and that we can spend the money from ScotWind within 2 budgets from the 30 gigawatts of power that's going to be coming from the North Sea. So everybody benefits from Scotland's energy. So we're all prosumers. We produce and we consume. Every community in Scotland is energy rich. There's enormously terrific work going on about trying to use the Clyde as a heat bathroom. And so people can benefit from across that. Whether you're on the top of a hill or at the bottom of a glen, whether you're near a loch or whether you're near the sea, you've got energy or energy rich, and yet we are in fuel poverty. So the point here is we set ourselves a mission where everybody benefits, and it leads us to a fabric-first approach when it comes to homes, so a national insulation company and retrofit company, because we can't do this individually. And that takes us from whether it's the farm or the forest to manufacturing to installation. Then you can think about the work that comes in there. We control the supply chain, we control the markets, and we nationally organise the solutions. It's a national public energy agency, making sure that the domestic and industrial and district energy supports everyone. The second mission I would set is very human, so it's just enough food for everyone. Wouldn't that be a novel thing if we decided that that was what a government was going to ensure? And isn't that tragic to have to stand here? Maybe 150 years ago we'd be saying the same thing. Our GDP, how much has our GDP grown in all that time? Not enough food for everyone. And where we look at the farming production, we look at vertical farms, we look to make sure that we can make sure that people go to bed with sufficient, nutritious, tasty and healthy food. And then the final one I would bring on, the final market that we should be supporting here, is access to all for active and low carbon transport. So we think there about a national transport agency coordinating and developing the active transport, the wheeling and the walking and the low carbon transport that we have. And what all of those things do is address the carbon emissions from all of those sectors, but also what they do is they address the costs in people's pockets of all of those things, and increase the quality of the access to them. So we set strict missions, and the government says these are the markets that we're going to support, these are the supply chains we're going to support, these are the partnerships that we're going to bring together. We're going to bring our universities, we're going to bring our third sector into this, we're going to bring our SMEs to do the building. This is something that is very business friendly, because what it does for businesses is saying, here's the markets, here's the supply chain, and they can do the planning accordingly. Solid, long-term ideas. So the characteristics are things like the markets and supply chains are governed by national delivery and coordination bodies. The government's de-risk investment through guaranteeing long-term support. Delivery and coordination bodies are overseen by citizens' assemblies. It's financed by the Scottish National Investment Bank, local government pension funds, Scottish government-backed crisis bond. It's delivered at local scales, supported by strategically located national centres, and it's SME focused over international corporations, ensuring money builds local wealth rather than extracted profits for overseas. It's well-being by pre-designed, it's circular by design, and it's emergency orientated. It's what we can do now because we saw it during COVID. We can turn on a dime. This is inspired by the Second World War arms in America. Within 19 days, the Ford Corporation was making B-2 bombers. Within 19 days of the bombs falling in Pearl Harbor. When we are in crisis, we can react and we can do things for the good of everybody. And the final one that I would bring to is maybe something that takes me back to my roots as in a marketing department at Strathclyde University, is to say, well, one of the things that we are losing at and that we must do better at is the messaging, in the stories about the positivity of what we as left of centre campaigners are trying to create. So we need a good old-fashioned social marketing campaign. The sort that was done by Gerard Hastings and Linda Bold across decades to get rid of tobacco, from a point where 80% of men in the UK smoked, now to a point where less than 20% of children can even name a tobacco brand. And what they did is they learned lessons from the marketing industry. And we've got to learn lessons within this strategic campaign that we have to build the positive case for action. We've got to learn from the fossil fuel industry. We've got to recognise that the fossil fuel industry are there undermining us every day. And they have been doing for decades, and that they learned from tobacco control. And they learned from big food. We need a marketing campaign that realises we're an antagonistic campaign over decades. We need to learn the lessons of modern marketing. So it's data-driven, it's experiential, it's emotional, it's highly targeted. So our message is are you scared? You're not scared enough. Because if you knew what was coming for you, if you knew how bad the climate emergency was going to be, you'd be terrified. But don't worry. We've got the solutions. We've got the solutions now. And those solutions mean a warmer house for you. It means decent food. It means decent jobs for your family. It means spaces where you can come and socialise. Now, we've got brilliant thinkers, brilliant artists, brilliant creatives who can do a much better job than I can at what that looks like. But let's not kid ourselves. We need a long-term marketing campaign to create the wealth, the excitement, the social contagion that we need change. And that gives the politicians the backing and the impetus to change their mindsets, to take the well-being economy further forward, to drive these national markets forward. So those are my chosen policies. Or we could continue with a kind of extractive GDP growth model that keeps our homes expensive, keeps them cold, keeps our food riddled with chemicals, keeps our streets littered, keeps our hearts devoid of hope. We could continue with that sort of policies. We could continue with tepid land reform and green growth, green ports, and bending to the will of the well-crafted PR activities of the oil and gas industry. That ensure that global corporations extract our wealth and we stay poor and we don't deal with the climate crisis. Instead of what I'll hopefully offer is suggestions from dreadfully pinched from brilliant thinkers across the world, robust research and lived experience that offers a new mindset, a new systems goal, and hopefully some new hope that builds every day the case for independence and getting that above 60%. Thank you.
He came with a very different approach, mission-orientated market making. What did you make of that one?
I found that one the hardest to take on board. I definitely have to go and listen again. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I was left feeling, there's so much in that. I don't think he quite gave me the structure that I needed to help hang it together, such as why I'd need to go back and listen to it again.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It sort of had parts and subparts. And this is the thing they've all found. You can't just pick one item in isolation. Everything is interlinked and dependent on other things. But the three main ones he picked out, the first one was about a well-being economy. Well, not going to disagree with that.
It's kind of come to the fore a bit more at the moment. And I'll tell you, I think that's happened because of the way the Labour government in Westminster is behaving. Because for those of us who've been voters while there's been a previous Labour government, some cases that goes quite far back, that this Labour government isn't pursuing those sort of well-being policies in the way that we'd want. So in a way, it kind of, maybe they've kind of opened the door for that discussion to happen and have a bit more, weight behind it in Scotland.
Well, I hope you're right. I don't feel quite as optimistic as that. My feeling right now is that at Scottish government level, when the word well-being appears at all, it's almost dropped in as a tick box thing with no substance to it at all. But I'm very happy to be convinced wrong. I would like to see well-being be very much part of their talking. But the people that I hear are talking about well-being, apart from Ian Black, Gordon McIntyre Kemp, Philippa Whitford, both doing active sessions and lots of meetings on that. But that's in the grassroots half of the world.
Maybe the actual situation is a bit between what you just said and what I said. Yeah.
But that's I get why that's Ian's first ask for sure. The second ask was where he wanted mission-orientated market making, but that was sort of to address lots of things. So the climate issue, fossil fuels, and he talked about having national missions, which we know John Swinney has put in place, sort of national missions, but Ian Black's were that we all benefit from Scotland's energy, and that there's enough food for all, and that we've all got access to local low carbon transport. These are very basic, fundamental human requirements, and you can't disagree with them.
Yeah, I get turned off when people start talking about missions and the six missions, our 6 missions, and our 6 points of change that we'll bring in. I'm quoting not really quoting, probably misquoting Mr. Starmer, because they kind of did that, and I just found it a complete turn-off. That's not to say that it couldn't be done well, but I have my doubts about who's going to do it well up here?
Yeah.
It's not that I think there isn't a place for it. It's just that personally, I go, oh God, not missions, ghost.
Does it resonate with the person in the street? And the third point actually was messaging, social marketing campaign to explain and persuade why we need social change. Now, that to me is the bottom line with all of this. What's the manifesto for? It's to engage people in your offering so they choose you.
Yeah, that's Ian's background. That's his professional background. So it's not surprising that he really wants to be able to get that a bit more solidly part of manifesto messaging.
Yes. So let's move on to ours. We haven't compared notes. It'd be interesting to see if we've got the same or any overlap in ours.
I had a good guess at what at least one of yours would be, so I thought, okay, I'll leave that to. I'll leave. And I must say, mine are not high level, and they're not missions, and they're not whatever it was that Ian was talking about. They're much more kind of nitty gritty than that. But my first one was, so any party that I'm going to vote for, I want them to commit themselves to limit election funding in Scotland to money that's been raised in Scotland.
Oh, I love that. That's a great idea.
There you go. That's a great idea, isn't it? Because, at the moment, you've got the Scottish Labour Party. Now, folks, I know this is audio, so you can't see me doing apostrophe marks in the air. So Scottish Labour Party. Well, fine. I know there's people in Scotland who are members of the Labour Party. Let them be the people who donate the money for their election campaigns in Scottish-only elections. But actually, that's not what happens. The British Labour Party just transfers a whack of money from down south to up here, and I'm sure the Unionists do it, Tories and the Lib Dems do it themselves. Tories, I'm sure, do it.
Reform will certainly do it,
and Reform will certainly do it. So I just think it's just a kind of basic democratic improvement that we could have.
I think that's absolutely brilliant, that one. And is the parties in the country next door buying our election, when you put it like that? Okay, good one.
Okay,
what's your next one?
Go on, you do one.
Well, my first one. I've been banging on about it for ages. Bloody electricity prices.
I knew this, folks. I knew this was the one, so I didn't bother saying it.
I don't care if it's reserved. It is not right that people in Scotland are paying the highest prices in Europe when we're producing so much energy. And when you think of the impact it would have on our society, if we had cheap electricity, then not only would it help eradicate fuel poverty, it would mean our public services aren't paying huge amounts of electricity bills for public buildings, hospitals, libraries, whatever. It would mean that our almost completely electrified public transport wasn't costing as much as it currently does. And it would also mean that businesses that use a lot of power, it would be at an advantage by locating their business here. Yeah. So I can't understand why any party right across Scotland would disagree that would be a good thing to do. Now, whether it's done through zonal pricing or whether it's done through challenging this idea that you can't have a publicly owned energy company in Scotland, which we know you can, you just can't have a government-owned one. How they tackle it doesn't matter, but they've got to get some teeth into it, and they've got to start challenging this like we mean it, because it's just fundamental to the kind of society we need to be, is that we control what we produce when it's something that we need so much.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yep. Shall I go next then again?
Go on.
Okay, so you have heard me say this before, because I said this was part of the speech I did last year at the Believe in Scotland Pensioners for Indy rally. One of the things that I talked about was drawing attention to the fact that there are currently 2 state pensions. One is referred to as the new state pension, and the other one is just referred to as the state pension, or probably the old state pension. So if you're 73 approximately and older, that's most pensioners, you get the old state pension. Because the new state pension they didn't backdate it, as it were. It was for people becoming pensioners from that point on. And the difference is something like £40 a week. So that's quite a lot of cash. Okay, so that's the background to this. But what I want is, just as the ScotGov has come up with the Scottish child payment, could we not come up with a Scottish pensioner payment? Now, not for all pensioners, same as the way that, Scottish child payment isn't for everyone. You've got to be receiving certain other benefits to qualify for it. Well, for pensioners who rely on the state pension, and particularly those of us who don't get the new one but are on the old one, could we not do something about a Scottish pensioners payment? Maybe it just starts off being a tenner a week, which is what the child payment did. It started off, and now it's up at about £25 a week. So that would help the pensioners that really do depend on that and don't have other income, although they may have other benefits. But that's kind of fine. That could be taken into account. So that's my second one.
Wouldn't disagree with that one either. It's about redistributing wealth, isn't it? And the three groups that are suffering the most under the current thing is families with children on a low income, disabled people, and pensioners. And if we can do something for them, then we're a happier society.
Exactly.
Okay, my next one, and I haven't pinched it from Selma, but it is one of hers, is land reform. And again, that thing that Laurie did, land tax. Why are we not valuing our land properly? Why are we not respecting what it can do for us? Why are we not respecting the fact that we own it? It should be doing something good for us. And yet we're just we don't exactly give it away, but it's unregulated, our land market. We allow people to do what they like with it.
Yeah,
and that's not necessarily.
we don't really, I mean, if it was, I don't know, if it was your child or something, you keep an eye on what they're doing, and you kind of say, look, maybe that's not such a good way of doing that. And
you don't sell them to overseas.
Don't sell them to overseas people, but we don't take care of the land that we've got in that sort of way. So I think that's a good one.
Yeah, we don't protect it against
Yeah.
speculation and, say, being accumulated in offshore tax havens for the benefit of people who will never set foot on that land.
Yeah, and that example that Laurie gave that really kind of made me sit up was people are buying up Scotland. Scotland has a lot of trees on it. It's got a lot of peat bogs that store carbon. And these people are buying up Scotland and then using that to offset their carbon emissions in their company. And I went, what? So we have to stop that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So my third one, I have to admit, this isn't maybe exactly what you would put in a manifesto, but I might be able to wangle it round to that. It's come from the trip that we had to Brussels last week. And we're in a room and we're with a small group of people and we're talking to members of the European Parliament. And at one point I brought up, the fact that unionists or Westminster kind of politicians will say to Scotland, oh, look, you're too wee. I mean, you're too small. It's, it's not going to work. And I hadn't even got to the end of that sentence when this particular MEP, I mean, it was like rolling on the floor laughing. I mean, she wasn't literally rolling on the floor, but, she was kind of doing that. You'd put ROFL if it was a text, or laughing out loud. She just went, oh dear. Malta and Luxembourg must have a dreadfully bad time of it, and what struck me was that she just laughed that off the table. But actually, we need to get an awful lot better at just laughing at some of the stuff that the unionists come in. So this is where you say it's maybe not exactly what you put in a manifesto. Maybe I just got left going, I'm just going to laugh next time I hear that. I'm going to laugh. I'm just going to laugh, and I'm not going to say anything else, because the minute you say something else and argue, you're on the back foot. Yeah. They've said something silly and I'm on the back foot trying to explain that. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. Let's just not do that. Let's just laugh and, ridicule them.
There you go. The ridicule strategy in the manifesto.
The ridicule strategy, yeah.
Okay, and my last one is, I would like to see something about democracy, and whether that's citizens' assemblies, direct democracy, the ICCPR, this idea that people need to be engaged in the politics, because to my mind, part of the rise of the far right and populism is because people aren't paying attention and they aren't involved and they don't feel they've got a stake in the running of whether it's their bit of the country or their whole country. So they switch off and then they just get preyed on by snake oil salesmen who come along and give ridiculous promises, and they go, oh, this, yes, I don't like that politician, I'm going to burn the whole lot down and vote to do that just because it's a laugh. That is not an engaged citizen who's got the well-being of their country at heart. And funnily enough, I was listening to one of the Holyrood committee meetings this morning, and they were looking at a report that had been produced by one of the people's panels. Now, I think it's fantastic that we have people's panels, but you never hear anything about them. And these are like mini citizens' assemblies. They've got a representative group of people. They'll maybe meet over, this one they mentioned, over 2 weekends. This one happened to be looking at Scotland's drug death crisis. And, they came up with a whole load of recommendations, which they then feed back into the Parliament. Now, this is a really good step. And you don't hear anything about it. And then tied in with that is the whole sort of local democracy should be properly local, the idea of like Leslie Widdowson, Build Scotland Local. So there is something about democracy that we can do within the devolved settlement even that we could do way more of. And I would like to see, because I think that if you can get people involved and interested, then you can get them to start making positive choices.
That's a really good one.
So that's a whole load of suggestions. I don't know if we've got any prospective MSPs listening. If we have, you can have those for free.
You can have them for free, yeah, fine.
And if you've got anybody's got any that they think would be really good ones, put it in the notes, and that would be lovely, or let us know what they are. And I'm sure we'll come back to this as we get closer to Holyrood elections 2026. But for now, hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.